Hello Andre, this is Jack Crane with my final sprint submission for game 370. First of all, I'd like to apologize for any slowness or brain lag that you may hear from me during this video. I've been awake for 48 hours consecutively in my attempt to try and make this work, and let's just say I'm fairly exhausted and feeling kind of out of it. I know it's not the best way to go into my final, and also for that reason, I'm going to try and keep this video short in order to not only not waste your time, but try and give me some more time to study. I guess I'll just start with the grading checklist and continue from there. Starting with the demo scene. So we needed to include a skybox, terrain, various pre-made models, some file-loaded models, and light sources. I kind of went out of my way and ultimately to my own downfall to try and not use any of the older sources, such like the frigate or the cottage, just per your request, and also because I thought maybe I could do it, and ultimately it ended up kind of biting me in the ass. As you can see, I've got these columns that didn't exactly turn out the way I wanted. They were going to be my multiple mesh objects. They had, I think, 3 meshes on them. The top, the bottom, and the middle of the column, all different textures, all different meshes, and I was going to try and assign those, but as you can see, I was not able to get that working. I couldn't even get the textures that they provided me with working, so they looked blank, and I didn't really have enough time to reset them. I honestly spent way too much time trying to make this look aesthetically pleasing, and then by the time I realized that I was spending too much time on it, it was kind of a little late. But as you can see, I've got the terrain map working. This is a dynamic map, bumps, and I used a TGA file to create it. Three repeated texture pyramids, a procedurally generated sphere. This is my personal favorite of the models I picked, was this little robot. The theme I went for this scene was a kind of desert scene, like Egyptian ancient ruin scene mixed with sci-fi, because I always kind of like the idea that aliens and Egyptians were somehow connected, even though as ridiculous as that may sound, and as false as it is, or not, who knows. So I did try and make it look as nice as possible. I really like the floating effect up top, but these over here are the repeated six-sided wrapped cubes. This is my other preloaded model, a cactus I got from some free resource. Not the best cactus either, but it did for the purpose. I also have the spotlight coming out of the top here, and a direction light coming from, I can't remember which direction exactly, but it is lighting up the whole map, as you can see. Don't know if there's a whole lot more. Oh, this is just the repeated box texture with working normals, and hopefully I'll be able to show that later on. As you can see, the pyramid does reflect the light from the top. And I think all of these are graphics object texture light shader classes, or graphic object texture light shader texture light classes that will interact with the light, and hopefully I'll be able to show that as well. With the main exceptions being the, I guess I'll take the time now to go over the clear many mistakes in the demo. For one, the separate meshes object did not even come close. The UVs on the sphere I was unable to get working as well. As you can see, there's this dot on the bottom, which actually ended up being kind of a cool effect for the whole alien thing, and with the light coming out of it, it ended up kind of working in my favor for the overall aesthetic. But as for the actual functionality of it, it's clearly lacking. else? The top of the skybox, I feel might as well, you know, you're gonna poke around and see it anyway, might as well be the one to tell you. I couldn't quite get it to line up correctly. I was able to do a few number adjustments, basically making the difference is infinitesimally small. I hope I said that right, as I could, and that was much closer than it was originally. I think I just picked kind of a bad texture, but it was about as close as I could get it, given the time. I've got the spheres bouncing up and down, as you already saw in the spinning models, but I guess that's enough of that. Try and get into the actual code. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the grading checklist now. So starting with the pre-made models, I know we've gone over a lot of this code already, but head to the model tools, or the model, I apologize. So for the pre-made models, we had the unit box, the unit repeated texture, 6 faces texture, the pyramid, repeated pyramid, and the sphere. So when I go into the model tools here, as you can see, I have just a standard unit box creation function with the pverts and ptry list arrays. After I set each of the arrays and assign them their color, I attempt to get the normals for them with this line here. The pverts.normal equals pverts indices 0.position.get normal. I know it's not the most efficient way of getting a normal. I could have done the math if I wanted to be more optimal, but this was quicker and served the purpose for the time being. For the created unit box repeated texture, it's similar, but obviously we need the repeating texture, so had to do the normals a little bit differently. With incrementing each of the arrays by 1 after each set. Not much more to talk about there. The create unit box 6 faces texture is exactly like the skybox, whose class I have right here. The main change I made to the skybox was making it of a graphics object base, as per your request. To make this not more interactable with light, but rather to be able to change the edges and faces of the skybox on a per mesh basis, which obviously I was unable to get to, as you could see with the models I showed in the demo. I'll go over the model class. I think I already went over that actually. The main changes to the standard vertex since the beginning are obviously the vector normals, the UV integration, and the mesh number integration for most recently the graphic objects, and mesh counting. Besides that, not much more to talk about here. For the terrain model class, this one was actually one I was rather proud of, as I was able to complete it rather recently. Well, I guess about a week ago, but made some changes that I think were helpful overall. So yeah, starting from here, I do a double nested for loop, running through the height getting the height of the height map for each indice, and then again for the width of the height map for each indice, and assigning the correct values for UV from the inputted values in the I'm sorry, I'm really out of it. I apologize. From the parameters, wow, I couldn't think of the word parameters, oh my god. From the function call, And then after assigning those values, I use this line again to get the normals and increment the indice afterwards in order to keep looping. And then at the end here, I just set the try list with the correct side manipulation using the indice values, and I increment the indice to keep the loop going. And afterwards, I create the new mod terrain model, and the render is just a mod terrain render to context with the destructor deleting the model terrain. I think that should do for this. This is the terrain model class. I think I also have the terrain shader, graphics object shader class in here somewhere. Yeah, graphics object terrain light, which accomplishes a similar idea. But the main point in this one obviously being to adjust for the graphic object and being able to set meshes on a per mesh basis, and allowing the object to interact with light being the main concern, as well as also streamlining a few things, especially in the constructor and in the setting the light parameters. I could have, I did, okay, I did make, I'm sorry, I've been awake for a very long time. I did end up consolidating the other light functions into a set materials function rather than just different iterations of the same set functions. Set light functions. Then I just have a set world and render to set the texture, resource, and sampler, send the world material, and render to context of the shader, which in this case would most likely be shader texture light. Moving on, go into the shader classes. Sorry, the shader classes, not the actual shaders. Starting with the main one, shader texture light. Since the beginning, had to adjust for the position, text chord, and normals. One trouble I was having with the layout was I heard that I thought even originally that it would be easier to do the D3, D11 append aligned element for both of these cases, but for some reason when trying to do this one in place of this one, it wouldn't work out. I ended up having to just stick with 32. I thought they would auto align for both, but it appears that it only auto aligns per the first one, and if there's another auto alignment after that, it doesn't really know where to go from there, or at least that's what it seemed like from my experience. I don't know if that is entirely correct. So, was this supposed to be? Oh, I apologize if this was supposed to actually. No, this is the shader classes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm losing my mind. So I create the color buffer and the other buffers here, and then zero the data. This was my misguided attempt to try and get both or multiple lights working. For some reason, both, well, early this morning, around 2-3 a.m. and late last night, I was unable to get my texture light shader to behave, and both fog and implementing multiple lights were a problem for me. For this scene, I was unable to get them working. I was able to get them working for the color light the shader color lights and the color light objects, but when it came to texture light and mainly the texture light objects, I was unable to actually get them to function the way I wanted to. I guess we'll go over the rest of the graphics object classes. So all in all, they're fairly similar except for a few key differences for each class. The main difference for the graphics object classes was obviously the per mesh basis functionality being the main proponent of it. So for each of the set functions, you go on a per mesh basis using the get mesh count function to iterate over the different variables and assign them accordingly to the correct mesh. For render, obviously, you also need to render each mesh separately and correctly. I think we already went over terrain light earlier, and shader, texture, and color, and these two I believe were given. And I did not do the mirror. It was optional, but I also could not finish it. I attempted it, but was ultimately struggling, and in the interest of time decided to scrap it altogether. And finally, I guess I'll just go over the DX app. So DX app being the main proponent of actually creating the scene, saved for last. I set up all my textures in the beginning, and this honestly I think screwed me over more than anything else, because I did not I did not hear of any warnings, but then after I think 24, maybe 30 hours of work, I was told that all of my textures, or at least there were some TGA textures that I had converted sketchily, if that's a proper term to use. They're just, in layman's terms, shitty conversions that ended up screwing over some of my shader classes and making it much harder to work with. But I ended up being stuck with them because I had spent so much time trying to work on the aesthetic of my scene up until then that going back would have meant even larger steps back than continuing to try and move forward. And yeah, anyway, after that I created the two main shader classes that I used for the demo, being shader texture and shader color light. I believe my sphere originally was a shader color light, but last minute I tried to get the UVs implemented correctly after having my normals been done correctly, and although I was unable to get them working, I ended up liking the look of the sphere with the incorrect UVs in the scene overall, and called a dumb design choice. But at this point, what else can I say about being dumb? I'm sorry, I am extremely I'm an extremely weird combination of exhausted and stressed right now, and I don't really know how to feel, to be honest with you. Moving on, this is where I loaded the loaded models. Afterwards, moving into the directional light, I tried to keep it as organized as possible. So it's going to look like I have a lot of extra variables here, but I really only used the extra variables for new textures, which I believed would be better for organization, although sacrificing a lot of optimization, I'm sure. And the graphics objects, I believe, needed a new variable for each iteration, and there were ultimately ended up being quite a few objects in my final scene, despite how scarce it may appear. I believe that is a large part due to due to the effects of the of my height map being way too big. Continuing forward, here's my directional light, which is the main light in my overall scene. I just set the context and send the camera matrices before getting into my 6-sided texture objects for the box. Afterwards, I create 2 stone repeated texture boxes and then move into my succulents, which ultimately ended up being appropriately named sucks, because they did suck. What I thought would be simple meshes ended up being very elaborate, and I could only force a really bad texture, cactus texture over them instead of the multiple meshes that I was aiming for. So I just set them to graphics object shader texture light classes, passed in the shader texture light in the p suck model, and setting the texture and multiplying the matrices and then setting to world. Next was the big sphere object, which was just the unit sphere model set to a graphic object shader texture light, originally a shader color light, but switched ultimately last minute. Next, I moved on to the pillar graphics objects, which is just setting the texture light and the model, and then multiplying by the matrices, setting the texture, setting to world, standard stuff here. I did a multiplication by rotation in order to get the effect of them looking like ruins to some extent, being bent which way and whatnot. I honestly spent way too much time on the aesthetic detail of, even though it doesn't look like I spent that much time on it, I actually did spend a lot of time trying to make this look like a detailed scene, and like I said, it ended up coming to bite me in the ass because I should have spent more time on the technical aspect. Kind of got carried away. But yeah, as you can see, they're they don't look that good now, do they? But they're bent and meant to look like ruins, and kind of misshapen. Actually, while I'm bringing up kind of useless cool things, I was introduced to, I think it was David introduced me to the idea of moving the skybox along with the camera to make it appear more fluid, and that the terrain is moving forward with you, kind of like in real life. And it made for a much more immersive experience rather than the jarring effect of being inside a skybox with stagnant clouds and not being able to move. So kind of a quick little trick there I thought was pretty cool. After the pillars, I believe, was the terrain light graphic object, was just my height map. Set it to the sand dune texture and set the terrain to the world. Next were the pyramid objects, which were actually what, oh, I didn't mean to do that there, I apologize. Actually, what inspired the scene originally was I just didn't know what to do with the objects we had, and I saw the pyramid and thought, you know, why not, let's just do Egypt. I'm sure you've seen it a million times before, but I thought I'd do my own personal take on it with the kind of cyberpunk alien mix. Whether that landed or not, you know, I enjoyed it, I guess. The skybox next, and then I initialized the projection matrix, and these are the gimmicky mouse controls that you set up, which gimmicky indeed, but useful nonetheless. Honestly, I don't know that I would have been able to get by without them. Very slow otherwise. Next, I do some very costly but simple tricks to try and get some movement out of the scene. So I modified some code from your demos to create that up and down bouncing effect as if the mothership is floating on top of the pyramid, as well as the spinning simple objects. Um, and these positions are set here for the lights. Obviously, the only one that ended up working was the sphere because I was unable to get the multiple lights working. However, this is what was the intent for that. This is my draw scene where I set these spotlight parameters and set up the spotlights individually. I think actually, excuse me. I think actually I can get a better demonstration of what the light can bounce off of and touch if I make a few adjustments here. So take this vector, I'll do this. So just to prove that the model terrain was indeed light reactive, make some modifications to the code here. Hopefully get a response. Oh, I have to turn off the directional light as well as not break my entire machine. Engine, not engine, graphics project. Set directional light, turn that off. And as you can see, the terrain does in fact react to the light. I believe a few of the other objects do as well. Obviously the pillars do not because the texture did not render, so how could they react? But in the interest of saving time to study and not wasting any more of yours, I think I'll just move on. Then oh, this is still back at the beginning. Let me skip back down. So after the update, just set the rendered target view and the clear depth stencil view back to context. I went back to top again. And then set up the displays for everything, mostly just rendering everything. I tried to keep it as organized as possible, but obviously things got a little mixed up there at the end. I rendered all the pyramids, rendered the displays, the drones, all the succulents, the stone display. I said stone instead of drone, maybe I just rhymed. The 6-phase display, skybox, terrain, pillars, all the good stuff. Mostly similar, in fact, incredibly similar. And at the end, I just delete all of the objects I created. Large list, probably could have narrowed that down a little bit, but yeah. Anyway, this is my final project submission. Not quite what I had hoped to deliver. I definitely was overambitious with what I thought I could do, and ended up having to scramble at the end. I would have liked to get a lot more done, but you know, I let myself down a little bit on that, definitely, and definitely let you down as well. So I apologize for coming with this scene. Hopefully I'm still able to get a fair amount of credit out of it. And I'd like to thank you for another wonderful year of teaching. Always an inspiration to me. The hard work that you're willing to put in to teaching these kids, and me especially. Again, thank you for a wonderful year, and wish you the best. Thank you.